Okay, so this is video 2 for the Soil and Agriculture unit, and this is focusing specifically on food and agriculture. We did the soil in video 1. So looking at there's the food pyramid concept. This has been updated. The old food pyramid that's shown up here has been around for years and years and years. Shows grains at the bottom, fruits and vegetables, and then meats and dairy is supposed to be what you're supposed to get the least of, limiting fat, oils, and sweets, which was the tip of the pyramid. Now we're looking at a more updated one, where we see just more current information on that. So they're saying grains is, all this is based on a 2,000 calorie diet, so 6 ounces of grains, and at least half of them should be whole grains is the key right there. Vegetables should be varied, lots of different vegetables, not the same ones over and over and over again. 2.5 cups a day. Fruits, 2 cups a day. Easy on the juices because the juices have so much sugar in them. They said it's better to eat the fruit as opposed to just drinking fruit juice. Dairy products, 3 cups total, so a lot more dairy than you would expect. And then 5.5 ounces daily of meat and beef, the protein essentially. Oils should be in there, but they're not a significant amount. And then it also talks about physical activity and exercise, which is new and added into the pyramid, talking about 30 minutes a day, physically active, most days of the week, 60 minutes for children. And then if you need to lose weight or to prevent weight gain, then you may need more than 30 minutes a day. So it just kind of takes that whole exercise concept into account, which is new. Okay, so the history of agriculture. There's the demand-based agriculture and the resource-based agriculture. So in demand-based, we determine how much agriculture, how much crops we produce by the economic demand, and it's the classical supply and demand concept. Very common during the Industrial Revolution. This is how stuff used to be based. Resource-based is determined, what we produce is determined by the available resources. So the economic demand, what we're asking for usually is more than what we get. This is the original type of farming, 10,000 years ago up until current, and that has changed significantly, and is it's a lot more expensive now, much more high technology now, because we can now make more than the production can now exceed the demand, and that's the switch now. Okay, so plant food sources, lots and lots of plant species. We have about 3,000 that are crop species. 300 are for food, 100 on a large scale, and then 15 to 20 species is what provides us with the vast majority of 90% of our food needs. So out of the 100 species, 300 that are used for food, 100 that are used on a large scale, it's only 20 species maximum that give us 9% of what we eat on a daily basis. So that's going back to Food Inc. when they're talking about there's really not as much selection and diversity as it looks like when you're at the grocery store. Thinking about the concepts of moving up the food pyramid, food chain, we know this hypothetically, but applying it to our food production, it takes 16 pounds of grain to produce 1 pound of edible meat, like steak or pork or whatever. So you're thinking about a lot of plant food sources going into that 1 pound of a protein source for us. The largest crop volumes, the most things that are being grown right now, wheat, rice, and corn. Corn especially in the U.S., rice especially in more Asian and Indonesian countries, wheat, potatoes, barley in Europe and stuff. Wheat and rice supply 60% of the human caloric intake, so that's really the staple of a lot of countries around the world, and really ours too when you come down to it, is that corn diet. So the other plant food sources that are listed, some of them are probably pretty familiar to you, some of them may be more unusual. But remember, you're thinking more not necessarily people eating this raw plant, but that these ingredients are in a lot of processed food as well. So like the cassava from the tapioca right here, Corn especially is in pretty much everything now. Soybeans are in a lot. Soy is in so many products now. So it's not really that necessarily we're eating so many soybeans per se, but the products are in everything else. Okay, cash crops versus subsistence crops. So cash crops are non-food products. So like latex, manufacturing stuff like that. They're not used for nutrition. So like a cash crop would be tea or coffee, sugar cane, stuff like that we use that makes a lot of money but doesn't impact a human's nutrition in any significant way. And then a subsistence crop obviously is the crop that you would use, the rice and the wheat and the corn, where we are using that for our food. Agroecosystems is an ecosystem created by an agricultural practice. The whole Midwest farmland, that whole concept right there, that's an agroecosystem. They have very low genetic diversity, very low species diversity, very low habitat diversity. It's all the same thing. It's one crop for miles and miles and miles. It doesn't have a lot of bugs. It doesn't have a lot of birds. It doesn't have a lot of invertebrates. All of the diversity that you would expect to see in like a grassland habitat or a forest habitat, whatever the case may be for this crop, you don't see because it's so much impacted by the agricultural practices, by the weeding that we do, the fertilizing that we do, the pesticide control. All of that stuff controls and keeps that diversity low. Okay, so they're different from natural ecosystems 5 major ways. Farming, the whole goal of farming, when you think about it, is to stop the ecological succession. So ecological succession, we want it to continue and to get more and more biodiverse as time goes on. Farming does everything it can to avoid that. We do pest control, we weed stuff, we fertilize stuff, all of that stuff to keep the specific one species that we want going and everything else not there. Farmers usually practice monoculture. They're only raising one crop as opposed to multiple crops. That tends to decrease the soil fertility, so the species diversity is very low. Farmers plant species in an orderly fashion. Pest control is more difficult. Food chains are more simple. Plowing is a huge natural disturbance. It breaks up pretty much everything, increases erosion, destroys biodiversity, so on and so forth. Okay, so the world food supply, we've talked about this a lot. Our current food problem is a result of an overpopulated human population. It depends on favorable environmental conditions, characteristics, but the agriculture itself changes the environment, so that can be detrimental to the conditions that you're trying to grow. It's just this vicious cycle. Food supply, if there's social unrest, people aren't working, people are angry, whatever, doing mobs or protesting, all that stuff, and they're not working, which means they're not trying to grow food, which means that the food supply is adversely affected. The grain production increased by a huge amount, 631 to 1,700 million metric tons in 40 years. It's leveled off since then. China, US, India, Canada, and the Ukraine are the top 5 countries, so make sure that you're comfortable with those. Okay, so the grain production, world grain production, is showing you the world versus those countries, and then what it's doing overall. So you see that it's starting to level off in the past 10-15 years, but you see that huge spike. The crop production has also mostly increased, or actually overall increased world crop production, significantly in the cereal range, the grains. Root crops have increased slightly. Protein and dairy have hugely increased, and then fruit and vegetables have taken a good jump as well. So the purchasing power index, these are all just kind of to show you, take the time to study these. They're all very self-explanatory. Um, this looks at the commodities, 33 primary commodities, and how it compares with manufactured goods based with time. So you see that, it's a decreasing trend. Sorry, I can't talk today. Decreasing trend as we get closer and closer to present day. Cropland per capita is decreasing overall, as you see. Okay, livestock, domesticated livestock, huge food resource for humans. We're talking about this in Food Inc. The way that the U.S. especially treats its whole food livestock sources, let's say. Ruminants are any four-chambered stomach animals, so like a cow, contain bacteria, convert the plant tissue into animal protein fat. So the plant material that we originally can't eat, like grass, is converted into protein, animal protein, like the cow that we do eat. Okay, so on the farm, some of the crops that we raise or that we get food from, notice the difference between the stuff that we're eating versus the stuff like the goat or the milk cow that we're getting products from. So not all necessarily straight protein. Okay, 90% of all the meat and milk is consumed in the U.S., Europe, and Japan, which is only 20% of the world population. So that's where it goes back to so strongly that so many of these third world countries are not surviving on the same diet as we are. That's where that rice and corn diet goes back to. That's what's more common. 90% of the grain grown is used for animal feed. It's not that we are eating it. And again, that conversion factor, 16 kilograms of grain is 1 kilogram of meat. We get 20 times the calories and 8 times the protein by eating just the grain instead of eating the meat. Be much more efficient. But nobody wants to give up their steak. Malnutrition and famines, 1/4 of the human population is currently malnourished. Africa is the highest, or Africa and Asia are the highest. South Asia and then parts of Latin America struggle significantly. So you see that, you see those areas in red are the biggest problems. Malnutrition and famines is from not getting enough calories per day and not getting the necessary percentages, not getting enough protein, not getting enough carbs, believe it or not getting enough fats, and then the minerals and vitamins are always just as important. So you have to not only make sure that you're getting enough calories, but make sure that you have that balanced diet in order to be, so that's the difference between malnutrition and a famine. A famine is you're hungry, you're not getting enough calories. Malnutrition is you're not getting the correct amounts of each type of food. Diets tend to be high in starches. And then, we've talked about before all of those conditions. It goes right back. This is so closely connected to the human population that these are all the conditions that may cause a famine. If you have a drought, so your crops aren't growing, high population sizes, lots of new immigration into the country or area, a flood to kill crops, wars so crops are not being grown, economic problems leads to unrest, which leads to lack of crops being grown. Any kind of political instability is the same problem. Land seizures where the crops aren't taken care of. Pests, which we'll talk about later. And distribution, so the food is growing or has been grown but isn't distributed, isn't taken to the people that need it. Panic buying and hoarding where people buy up a whole bunch of stuff and don't share it with others. Okay, so the limits, how much food we can produce is limited right now by the arable land. How much land is available for us to actually plant, the amount of precipitation, and the temperature, and then the global warming. To increase the food supply, what people are talking about now is improving irrigation and utilization of water. So the drip irrigation or hydroponics is a hugely increasing market right now, where we're using water and land much more economically to grow crops. Increasing the arable land is not really feasible at this point in time. in any large-scale way, especially. Eating lower in the food chain is very big. There's that whole movement, but is not considered necessarily valid simply because we can't, we're carnivores. I mean, no matter what else you argue, we have to have the protein in order to be healthy, and therefore we have to figure out some way of getting the protein. It doesn't always have to be, red meat, but it has to be some kind of protein, even if we start to utilize more like the soy and the eggs. So that's that whole concept. Okay, so modifying the way that we distribute the food, especially in those big problem areas like Asia and Africa. The best solution there is to grow locally, to teach the locals how to use the land, how to grow it, and how to support themselves so they don't have to rely on food coming into them, but they can grow their own. Okay, and so this is different crops in various places. New and old agriculture. Notice the use of a lot more mechanics, a lot more mining, pesticides. Okay, how much land is arable? That depends on who you talk to. So really not very much when you think about it, when you look at this graph being, this is the most arable and this is not so much arable. Very, very relatively minor amount. Soil degradation is the problem. We've talked about that in the last video, where you have all these problems that contribute to less arable land available. Using fertilizer, you notice that as the higher the fertilizer use, the lower your yield overall as time goes on, because you essentially burn out that land. Crops in different places, contour planting, rice farming. Looks like more rice farming.